You're listening to theoutdoorstation.co.uk.
Hello and welcome to SeaKayakRoutes.com. I'm Simon Willis, and I reckon this podcast has cost me about £5,000. When I recorded it, I made the mistake of having Liz, my wife, in the room with me. Together we listened to Doug Cooper, the head of paddle sport at Glenmore Lodge, talk so passionately about sea kayaking in Greenland, we were both salivating at the end of the recording. We almost signed up on the spot for the Lodge's 2008 trip, which would give us the time to raise the money, I suppose. Anyway, I better get in quick, because once you hear this, I know where you'll want to go. Here's Doug Cooper.
Paddling in Greenland for me, having been fortunate enough to paddle all around the world, if somebody was to say, Doug, you can only paddle in one country for the rest of your life abroad, then for me it would be kind of Greenland for sure. And for a number of reasons. Partly the historical content. At the end of the day, it was the Inuits who started sea kayaking, and all of our modern boat designs are based from Inuit designs. So to go back and paddle in the place which is the home of kind of sea kayaking, is really special. So there's the historical parts, there's then the early Greenland exploration with explorers like Gino Watkins and the like, learning how to kayak, bringing those knowledges back to Europe. So there's that package which is stunning. And then the scenery and the exploration which is available out there, the scenery is just unbelievable. And you've got kind of the mixture of the ocean seas, the fjord seas. You can go for kind of the rough ocean swell, you can go for the more sheltered fjords. Mix in with that, you've got the ice, and if you speak to anybody who's paddled in ice before, you'll see their eyes twinkle and a faraway look as they're kind of remembering these magical experiences. And the ice, you've got icebergs, which are the size of multistory houses you can be paddling amongst. You've got the sea ice, which is the flat ice where it's frozen, and as it floats down the east coast or down the west coast, and it's just masses of just flat sea ice, completely different again. And then you've got the brash ice, which is where it's carved off the glaciers, it's smashed to smithereens, and it's lots of small ice cubes in the water. So the ice is constantly changing and requires judgment, experience, skill to make the right decisions with it. And then you've got into the melting pot there, you've got the mountains around you, and you've got 4,000 foot rock walls, you've got kind of snowy peaks, half have been climbed, half haven't been climbed, you've got glaciers cascading down into the ocean. Wildlife-wise, it's not the best wildlife in the world. There's other places I'd suggest to go purely for the wildlife, but you still are seeing humpback whales, you are still seeing minke whales and seeing seals. So you've got that world-class kind of scenery, and you've got the wildlife as well. And for exploration, hey, there's not that many people paddling out there, and there's coastlines, there's headlands, there's fjords, which really haven't been explored. So you can go as committing or as non-committing as you wish. And if you want to do a 2-month self-support trip and paddle a bit of coastline, which is rarely, if ever, been paddled, you can do it out there. If you want to fly out there for a couple of weeks holiday along more sheltered fjords, which people have been, but there's more room for manoeuvre with regards to safety point of view, you can do that as well.
Before we come on to your experiences, tell me about the practical side of things. If you're an independent traveller, captivated by what you've just said, how do you organise a kayaking trip to Greenland? I mean, are there boats out there? Do you have to take your own? If you take your own, how do you air freight them? Where can you stay? Is it particularly expensive? Just some practical stuff, first of all.
Absolutely. I mean, the practical side of Greenland would be the other draw to it, because it's not easy. And for me, the world is becoming a smaller and smaller place, and it's easier and easier to fly into almost any country in the world, find an outfitter and go sea paddling. And that's not quite the case in the majority of Greenland. So you still have to plan and execute kind of your plan to succeed in many venues in Greenland. So in my mind, you can still have a real expedition out there as opposed to an outfitter's kind of custom-made trip out there. And things to consider: flights to Greenland would generally be via Iceland, Denmark, or from Canada. And again, they're few and far between. They're not daily flights, so you have to kind of work those out. Once you get yourself to Greenland, then there's only, again, a smattering of airfields around the coast. So you then have to think, where do you want to paddle from there? And do you want to paddle from the airfield? Do you need to kind of get a connection? The connection could be the helicopter service in Greenland. It could be a local ferry, or you may have to charter a boat to kind of get you dropped off where you want to. So just you getting where you need to go is the first bit.
Is this all organisable on the internet?
It's getting easier and easier these days. If you'd have asked me this question 15, 16 years ago when I first organised trips out there, then no, it wasn't. But these days, it's to organise a trip in Greenland these days is as easy as it's ever been. And yes, a lot of this is organised over the internet, which is fantastic.
How do you get a boat out there?
Boats and the gear is the most kind of exciting. Read into that challenging. there are a few there are becoming more boats in Greenland where you can borrow boats in Greenland. So in some of the main towns on the west coast and in Amaslik on the east coast, there's a small selection of boats which you maybe have to kind of hire out there. So that's great. There's limited choice, but there are some boats out there. So you may be not fussy about your boats, have a limited amount of time, and then you could get information and find boats you can borrow out there.
So you can get some boats?
You can get some boats, but of course the boats, there may not be enough boats for your group. You may be going to a place where there isn't any boats, or you may be doing an expedition where the boats which you can get out there aren't suitable. So therefore you've got to look at getting your own boats out there. And the way to get your own boats out is to freight your own boats. And all food and everything that goes into Greenland is freighted. So there's a very good freight service into Greenland. They're used to freighting stuff into Greenland, so therefore organising it is relatively straightforward. So in the past, all the times I've kayaked out there, I've freighted my boats in.
When you mean freight, you mean stick them in great big containers and take them out there by ship?
Absolutely, yeah. So to give a bit of a concept, the paddling weather window in Greenland is limited by the ice, and depending on what part of Greenland you go into, that could be any time from early July to late September. And in some parts of Greenland it may only be August, or a few weeks in August, which is available. So if you were doing an August month's kayaking trip, you'd need to freight your kit out there. To freight your kit out, the freight would normally leave about 6 to 8 weeks before. So for my August trips, I'm usually freighting my stuff out in the first week of June. So you need to arrange with a freight organiser in your country, whether it be UK or further afield. Get the freight organised a long way in advance, and then your boats and your gear needs to be packed up ready to go in June. If you're just taking plastic boats out, then that may just consist of a bit of bubble wrap around the boats and they'll be fine. If you're taking fiberglass boats out like I have done in the past, you may be wanting to either build a proper wooden container so the boats are safe within the big freighting container, or a polystyrene-based kind of container.
You have to build your own?
Yes. So that's all.
Nobody comes along and has a kayak container to stick it in?
Unfortunately not, no. So all you do is you're just hiring space within the big commercial container. So
and take out a repair kit when you go? And
take a repair kit. So when glass boats, I'd be kind of creating my own container to put the boats in within the container.
And they're pretty switched on at the other end for having kayakers arrive, presumably in the major places. So are they? Oh, you're looking at me sceptically.
In Greenland, then no. They're switched on to receiving freight.
Right.
So they're switched on to receiving freight, and then your kayaks or your box with your boats in will just be kind of dumped to one side, and it'll hopefully be there in one piece when you get there.
So you turn up with your forklift truck. No, you don't have one of those. You turn up there with an axe, smash open your crate and hope the boats are in there and have to carry them somewhere.
Yes.
Right.
But where all container ships come in are obviously on the coast, so you're normally just putting them into the water alongside and then paddling them from there, either around to the boat which you've chartered, or that's where you're starting your trip from and away you go.
Right, we've got the boats there. What do you eat?
So if you're really brave, you could go out there with your throwing stick and eat seal. But for most, I wouldn't recommend that. So
actually, are you allowed to?
Yes, yeah, that's the way they survive and they live out there. So kind of everything's fair game within there. But they do have quotas on their whales, so you couldn't just kind of go and feed off whales as you wish. There's strict quotas for whales, but for the seals, then
the image of somebody chasing a whale in a kayak.
So food's a key thing, to be honest. So you need to be thinking about how you get into Greenland. You need to be thinking how you're getting your equipment and what equipment are you taking. What you're wearing will depend a little bit where you're going, and if you're going in an area with a lot of sea ice where you may be dragging kayaks over flat ice and sea ice, then dry suits are essential. If you're in an area which is more ice-free, so you're going to be kayaking, then a two-piece system would work fine. The thought of capsizing out there, really, you can't. The sea water's 2 degrees, so you need to be thinking very carefully about your equipment. Tents, etc., need to be mountain-based tents, because although you're at sea level, I've had winds up to 70 to 80 miles an hour at sea level, so you need mountain-based tents.
Presumably geodesics or self-support.
They work very well, yeah, so geodesics. You may be camping on places where there's no pegs can work, so you need to be thinking about either snow balances for rocks or kind of other alternatives, so that gear is really important. Stoves is essential. You can't buy gas out there, so therefore petrol-based stoves is usually the only way to work it. So you can buy meths in some places, so tranches could work, but your petrol-based stoves would be the standard, and that would be easy to get the fuel out there. So
probably best to ship them out as well, because people are getting... I just reading something about some planes just more recently being very twitchy about putting stoves in hand luggage or regular luggage, even if they've got no fuel anywhere near them. Absolutely,
yeah. So when you freight your boats out, then you'd usually be freighting your stoves out, and most really freighting your tents out as well, and that saves weight on the flight in, because if you're using helicopter-based transport within Greenland, then the flights are quite strict on the weight. And then, of course, there's food. To fly in with the food isn't going to work, because you won't have the weight load. So then you've got the option of buying food within Greenland or pre-packing it. You can buy food within Greenland, but the selection is perhaps a little bit more limited. So if you've got a small team and you've researched the town you're going to, they may have really good supermarkets, and you could most really put together expedition food for a small team. To be honest, I'd usually suggest, for peace of mind, if you're a bigger team or you're going for a longer length of time, is to pre-pack and get all your food in your country and freight your food out with the boats, and then your food could be your own expedition delicacies, whatever you prefer from that.
Are there twitches in the United States about British meat? Because I know you just can't take British meat into the US, even in freeze-dried stuff at the moment.
No, they're not very twitchy about many things in Greenland, to be honest, and they're not even twitchy about your passport and your land, so it's fairly relaxed from that point of view. So you'd be able to kind of create your own expedition menu as you wished for getting kind of stuff in there. The top tip for that is, if you're packing your stuff up, to be very careful packing food inside the bulkheads of your boat, because all boats, no matter how old they are, they'll give off a fiberglass smell, and that smell will get into your food and taste. And it's likewise with plastic boats. So through bitter experience, I've had plastic and fiberglass tasting food on previous expeditions. So I'd suggest, although it seems a good idea to pack your food in the bulkheads for freighting it out there, definitely don't do it, and save yourself some nicer tasting food.
So where do you go? Give me a pen portrait of what's where on Greenland. Where can you aim for, and what the conditions like?
You'll have the choice of East Coast, West Coast or South Coast. If you're looking for more challenging logistics, more remoter coastlines, more ice dependent, more weather dependent, then the East Coast, that's what it offers you. Read into that: spectacular, remote, phenomenal. However, it is the more challenging of the coastlines to organise trips to.
What would the weather be like, and when's the weather window there?
The weather generally is kind of pretty settled on the East Coast, generally, but it's going to be the ice window which you'd need to be kind of looking at, and the ice window would normally be in that kind of month of August to early September.
How reliable is that?
In this day and age, it's not reliable. It's really varying. The thing to do is to check out with the Danish Meteorological Institute, which is www.dmi.dk, and they will have all the ice charts, and the ice charts are updated weekly. So if you're planning to go to an area, you can study the ice the year before, and you'll get an idea what the ice is likely to be in that area. So the ice would be the main make or break. To get there, you'd usually be flying into Kulusuk, which is near Amaslik, or Constable Point, which is near Scoresbysund, and that would be your two starting points, and from those points you'd be chartering boats or starting from there. Both phenomenal paddling areas, but logistics, equipment are good if you're just working from those areas, but of course you've got 800 miles of East Coast to explore, so to go further afield, there's some real good exploratory expedition country out there to go to.
It sounds like it would be a shame somewhere like that to have to do a loop trip. It is possible to do a kind of a one-way trip and arrange with a boat to pick you up at a certain place at a certain time, is it?
Yes, it's quite possible to do that, and I've done it a few different ways, and to be honest, I've usually kind of got the drop-off at the start, and I've checked to see where the ice is coming from, and I'll get the drop-off to take us up into the ice, and then you're paddling back away from the ice, so therefore if you get a pickup at the end, then you've got that worry of will the boat be able to get there, or if the ice comes in you'll get stuck. So I'll often get a drop off, and that way during the drop off you can recce the amount of ice and make a more informed kind of on the water decision. But yes, you can hire boats to drop you off or pick you up to have a to save an out and back trip if you wish.
Okay, South Coast?
South Coast is a fantastic playground, and that gives a real combination of more ice-free zone, but lots of ice. The ice comes down the east coast and pokes its nose around Cape Farewell, which is the southern tip, and the south coast would technically be the southwest coast, which would be Nautilic or Narsarsuaq would be the two kind of main bases. There's an international airport at Narsarsuaq, so starting from there, or get an internal helicopter to Kayak, Juliana Harb, or the Nautilic would work. There are some boat outfitters in Narsarsuaq and in the Nautilic, and from there it gives you an option of outside coasts, some fantastic fjord-based paddling. It gives options of paddling up to glaciers. The mountain scenery in the south is famous for its big rock walls, 4,000 to 5,000 foot rock walls, as well as the ice cap, as well as the glaciers. So for a variety of scenery paddling, South Coast is stunning. Ease of getting to, fraction more easier than the East Coast. With regards to outfitters, there's a couple of outfitters or places you can hire boats for in the south. And the only downside is the weather is a little bit more inclement down there, because on the southern tip it has the worst weather. So you have a longer paddling window from early July through to end of September, because it's more ice free generally. Having said that, out there last year we were stuck in the ice for quite a few weeks. So generally it's more ice free, but the weather is far more inclement down there.
And the west?
The west is where most of the settlements are, so again, getting to the west is the easiest place of all to get to, unless you go to the far northwest, which then would start getting akin to the east coast. But the west would be the more popular areas to go into, because there's easy flights in. Again, there's some outfitters up there, and the scenery would give you kind of reasonable variety, but maybe not quite as kind of remote and wild as the east coast. But on the flip side, it gives you still stunning mountains, stunning ice, glaciers, etc., with perhaps a little bit more room for manoeuvre, because there's a little bit more population in that neck of the woods.
So if the east coast was just a bit too necky, between that south and southwest and the west, which is the second more interesting area, would you say?
I would say that
Southwest or west?
The southwest, I'd say, is stunning. So the southwest really gives you, at times, the dramatic scenery and the remoteness of the east coast, but it's more accessible. The west coast, then there's still some beautiful paddling to be had up there, but it's more interspersed with kind of lower lying islands and kind of habitation.
At the end of the day, when you come ashore, what are you coming ashore on? Are you just pulling up on an ice floe, or what? I can't quite get my head around that.
The kind of the time of year out there, then the snow's kind of all generally melted, so you're landing on kind of on anything from a sandy beach to kind of a bouldery beach. So the landings are generally reasonable, sometimes few and far between, but generally reasonable. You'd usually be finding a kind of a rounded, bouldered beach or a sandy beach to land on. And if that wasn't available, then if you're in the inner fjords area, there's not so much swell, so ice and water-worn rocks are relatively nice, flat, slabby areas of rocks to pull up. So to pull out on is often not too bad. To find campsites can sometimes be a bit challenging, because obviously you're on a coastline with big mountains cascading straight down into the fjords, so the campsites can sometimes be few and far between.
Are the maps good, and are they any help at finding them?
The maps are 1 to 250,000, and they were surveyed in 1932. There are some nautical charts at 1 to 50,000 you can get for some areas, but they're of limited use. Having done some mountaineering expeditions, the maps are of very little use, so you tend to be working with aerial photos or Google Earth. The coastline features on the 1 to 250,000 maps are actually surprisingly good, because the coastlines were quite accurately surveyed, where obviously the glaciers and the mountain areas have changed or are less well surveyed. So as a trip planning and a reasonable navigation, then the 1 to 250,000 maps are actually surprisingly good once you get your head around the scale. But these days, with the advent of Google Earth, and it's kind of opened up the expedition paddlers amongst us, because you can be checking it out through the satellite system as opposed to kind of second guessing it.
Are there hazards in the form of bears, or is it just mosquitoes?
It depends again what part of Greenland you're in. The polar bears tend to travel via the sea ice, so by the nature of the fact that generally when we're sea paddling, you're paddling in the area when the sea ice is dispersed, then bears are not necessarily a high risk. But of course, if you're up on the east coast, and particularly if you're up in the northeast, or likewise if you're up in the northwest, then bears would be a consideration, and for some of those areas you'd need to take kind of firearms with you and get permits for that. So for some areas bears would be a kind of a concern, but in many of the areas there'd be less of a concern. So the main challenge is getting used to the wee black flies and some of the mosquitoes. But having spent a lifetime of paddling in Scotland, I still don't rate them worse than the Scottish midges, to be honest. And the slightest breeze and they're away, and a mosquito net to kind of stop the annoyance, then they're bearable. And once you're on the sea, then they're obviously not there.
You said you've been going there for 15 years. You obviously like the place.
It's amazing. Like I did my first expedition out there in 1991, and I'm on expedition number 9 at the moment, and some of my trips have been 3-month trips up on the ice cap, climbing mountains and living out of sledges, and some of them have been 6-week trips, self-support up the east coast of Greenland by sea kayak. So for a kind of an explorer at heart, which I'd class myself as, then there's arguably no greater playground in the world, whether it be on the sea or in the mountains, than Greenland.
We're having this conversation here at Glenmore Lodge. Are you still running trips there? Because I remember, actually, we first went sea kayaking with you. We did a week's course here, and it was fantastic. But the worst thing about it was, and it was the worst thing, was the slideshow you gave us about Greenland. Because we just wanted to go there. We weren't good enough to go there, because we'd have probably killed ourselves if we'd been come that summer. So tell us, do you still do those trips? And what standard do you have to be, really, if you wanted to come along on a Glenmore Lodge course?
We do. We still run kind of a very popular and successful kind of expedition out there each summer, and we base ourselves on the southern tip, because again I think that gives the best kind of paddling conditions from a sea ice point of view. So you're guaranteed to see sea ice, but touch wood, it shouldn't be so much that it's going to stop us paddling, and it gives the access to the mountains, the glaciers, the works. We do a 12-day self-support trip out there, and I've got a fleet of kayaks, P&H Capella kayaks, so it's single performance plastic boats we use out there, and we will pack our boats for 12 days worth of food, and we'll go and explore the southern tip of Greenland and up into the fjords, and a self-support journey into some of the most spectacular kind of scenery there is in the world, I'd suggest.
One of the things I didn't ask you before, and perhaps you could address this question as part of that, is cost. How much is it to come with you guys, and how much would you say, are you looking at, I know you can't give a precise price, but a ballpark figure for someone organising their own? Leave aside maybe the flights, but in terms of shipping, perhaps internal flights and renting a boat, because I've never hired a helicopter in Greenland, and I've never hired a boat in Greenland. I wouldn't know whether it's actually possible to do in terms of a sensible budget for a few people.
Yep. And so if you're kind of working out yourself, depending a little bit how remote you're going and how much kind of hiring of charter boats, etc. you were doing, but if you were going to be doing perhaps a 2-week trip where you were hiring one charter boat to collect you or to drop you off, you were freighting your expedition gear out there, then if you were budgeting on for a group of say 6 people, so you're distributing that between 6 people, if you're budgeting between £600 and £1,000 plus your flights to Greenland, then that would be a reasonable budget each. Yeah. So flights to Greenland from the UK come in at about £900 return door to door. And that would be UK to Denmark flights or UK to Iceland flights. It would be Iceland or Denmark to Greenland flights, and then it would be perhaps a helicopter flight internal as well. So if you include in all that flight package, and that would be about £900 return. And if you were to add about £600 a person on top of that, then, or £600 to £1,000 on top of that, then that would be giving you your internal logistics, freight, food kind of budget. So
and if they were to come with you? The lodge, I should say.
So coming with kind of Glenmore Lodge, then the expedition is £1,550 plus flight. So you're talking about kind of $2,400 all in, and that's all your food and everything. And all you have to do is kind of read all the information I give you, and I'll organise kind of everything else. So it's really just kind of pitching up at the airport and then coming and enjoying an expedition of a lifetime, really.
That was Doug Cooper, Greenland enthusiast and head of paddle sport at Glenmore Lodge, Scotland's National Outdoor Training Centre. So, in the summer of 2008, don't expect too many podcasts. Remember, I post 2 each month, one at the start and one in the middle. The timing's dictated by Apple Macintosh and the way they bill me. Anyway, I'm Simon Willis. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Find out how easy it is to subscribe to all our free programmes. Visit our website at theoutdoorstation.co.uk.